记录时代精神，连接东西方精英翘楚。我是潘磊，这里是英国首都伦敦，欢迎您收看瑞内人物访谈节目。本期节目，我们有幸邀请到帝国理工学院商学院数字化转型中心的负责人 Chris Tucci 教授，和我们分享其专业研究领域有关高速增长时代下的数字化变革。该中心旨在帮助企业了解数字革命对组织的深远影响，从人工智能到互联网，再到区域块链接，其工作重点是新兴的数字技术以及如何利用它们达到预期的商业和社会目标。接下来有请 Chris Tucci 教授和我们分享其在行业领域的宝贵知识财富。Welcome, Professor Chris Tucci, taking time to join today Renee Talk Time program. Chris,
Thank you. 大家好，我很开心今天可以和你们一起进行这个讲座。很抱歉，我的中文水平无法直接和你们交流，但是希望我们在接下来的1个小时里，可以互相探讨、互相学习，对数字创新有一个更深入的理解。期待今天一起相聚的时光。谢谢大家。
Thank you for the Chris wonderful Mandarin welcome speech. So following, we have the first question for the Chris. What are some latest digital technology trends that business need to know about it? 企业需要了解哪些最新的数字技术趋势呢？ Chris, please.
Thanks. I think that digital technologies, we can probably divide them into 2 different categories. The first one being sort of general purpose technologies that are applied across all different sectors. And there we have things like 5G and 6G wireless technology, blockchain, distributed ledger technology, 3D printing, drones. I won't say quantum computing because it's still quite far off in the distance, so I don't know if that's so relevant to business these days. And then we have more specifically digital technologies oriented toward data. And that could be things like Internet of Things or sensors, wearables, Industry 4.0 or automation and robotics, artificial intelligence and machine learning, reality plus, in other words, augmented reality or virtual reality, surveillance, biometrics, and probably crowdsourcing platforms as well. So all of these things are really, I would say, quite important for business to think about in this year.
Thank you. So how is the digital transformation presenting enormous challenge and opportunities for business? 数字化转型如何为企业带来巨大的挑战和机遇呢？ Chris, please.
Sure. I'm going to share my screen to think about this a little bit. Here's just a little slide. And I think this refers a lot to creative destruction, which is oriented, which Schumpeter developed in 1942, the concept. And basically he said something like, it's a process of industrial mutation that incessantly revolutionizes the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one and incessantly creating a new one. And I think that's something, usually when we hear about creative destruction, usually we're very afraid because we say, oh, it's bad, it's destruction. But Schumpeter didn't think of it like that. He really emphasized not only the destruction aspect, but the creativity aspect of it. So in other words, the opportunities as well. So yes, we can imagine, for example, in the typewriters and how, an electric typewriter came around and a computer, replaced the typewriter and all those sorts of, that sort of sort of disruptive element. But we can also think about lots of new opportunities from digital technologies, right? So, the one I love to think about here is like these drones that are being deployed in insurance for inspecting things. So in other words, you send up a drone after an earthquake or after a big storm, and instead of sending a person there, which takes a long time and could be very dangerous, the drone just flies over, takes photos or videos, and then we automatically analyze it. And then, if it's something that looks like the building was damaged, then you just pay the claim really quickly. So in other words, it's kind of like, a completely new set of opportunities for insurance companies to use these kinds of technologies, and for many companies analogously in different sectors.
Thank you. So what do the most digital business and innovation strategies fail, and how can organization avoid this? 大多数数字业务和创新战略失败的地方在哪里？那组织如何避免这种情况呢？ Chris, please.
Thanks. Yeah, it's tricky because there are lots of pitfalls when you're making a kind of a digital transformation in your own organization. And, so lots of people have studied this, and there's some really interesting articles on this. And so I would say what you shouldn't do is, first of all, you shouldn't start investing heavily before you figure out your business strategy, right? So you should actually think about the business strategy first, and then, make your investments. But you want to stage your investments and do it small. Like, one of the biggest mistakes that companies make is to put too much money in on small numbers of things, as opposed to having a small amount of resources dedicated to many things. So you want to have an experimentation mindset. So not having an experimentation mindset is usually one of the major pitfalls. Another pitfall is to hire an army of consultants. You don't want to hire a lot of consultants in when you're trying to think these things through in the very beginning stages. To not think about the customer or user experience. In other words, successful companies think a lot about the customers, about the user experience, and how they can attack some of the problems that customers are feeling right now. Another really, really important factor for digital transformation is to understand and address employees' fears of being made redundant. In other words, employees might be afraid to be put out of a job, to be automated out of a job. And so I think it's quite important to address those fears. And I think the companies that have failed a lot didn't really think about that very much. They just said, oh, we're going to automate everything. And then the employees were not going along with the whole thing. And then the final thing I would say is to, one other pitfall is just to procrastinate, for too long. So to say, oh, we'll figure it out later. Maybe things will get easier in the future. And the fact is, now is the time to invest. And so it's time to start thinking about these things and running some little experiments. And if you wait too long, sometimes you end up getting further and further behind on the technological front, thus making it more difficult to catch up.
Thank you. Which industry or area of business practice are we likely to see the significant innovation and disruption in the future? 未来哪些行业或商业实践领域可能会出现重大的创新和颠覆呢？ Chris, please.
Yeah, there are lots of sectors at risk, you might say, or jobs at risk. We'll talk a little bit about that maybe later. But in terms of actual sectors, I think we draw a distinction between, the very short term, the medium term, let's just say, 6, 5, 10 years or so, and then the longer term, sort of more than 10 years from now. And I think that in general, most people think that, for example, truck drivers or lorry drivers, are vulnerable. And I think that's probably true, but that's more like a long-term trend. So it's this very interesting PwC study that analyzed this in a quite thorough way. And what they came to the conclusion was that, transportation for sure in the long run is very, very vulnerable to disruption and automation. So is manufacturing. So people who are, working in the manufacturing sector. But in the medium term, it's really more of repetitive, what we might call white collar jobs. So sort of people doing similar repetitive tasks over and over again, those can be relatively automated. And what a lot of people think is that the financial services sector has a lot, of those people, and probably in the medium term, and maybe even in the quite near future, the financial services, finance and insurance, et cetera, are quite at risk from automation. So it's going to be a lot of disruption and upheaval in that sector. And then maybe after that, you might say wholesalers and retailers as well, just because of the e-commerce channels that are currently out there. So I think those are probably the biggest areas to be concerned about.
Thank you. Will it become even more difficult for the established business and the government to keep up with exponential rate of technological change? What can they do to prepare for it? 老牌企业和政府是否会更加难的跟上飞速发展的技术变革呢？他们为此可以做些什么样的准备呢？ Chris, please.
Yeah, I think we can break this into two parts, right? And think about the government part. So, the question is, what could a government do to sort of keep up with things, in their own countries? And I think part of this is thinking about how to build digital skills and digital literacy in the general population. It is quite difficult because it takes a long time for training and for education programs to be put into place and to have an impact. But I would say probably, one of the biggest, in the long run, probably one of the best things that a government could do would be to invest in digital skills across the whole range of all those technologies I was talking about, and including managerial skills for people who to understand and appreciate technology, so that people can be a little bit more reactive in the future when things change, because things are going to keep changing. Now, in terms of the business side, again, I go back to how can a business keep up with these sorts of changes? And again, there, I have to go back to this idea of running small experiments, small technological experiments, business model experiments, bringing in people with digital skills. But it's not a question of, and in fact, that's something I've studied myself. It's not a question of just, replacing everybody with a bunch of data scientists or something like that. It's really more like having a mix, a good balance between digital skills, and you're going to keep bringing in people with upgraded skills over time, and have a balance of those people who understand the business and have legacy skills. And you combine that with doing small experiments in terms of business modeling. And I think that's probably the best way for a company to stay fresh and to keep on top of things. Maintain research and development, try and experiment a little bit, try and do some open innovation programs, and keep bringing in people over time who have new digital skills. So I'd say those are probably the top ways that a company might react to this sort of environment that we're in.
Thank you. Are you worried about any business and the societal impact posed by the digital technology like privacy and security? 您是否担心隐私和安全等数字技术对商业和社会造成的任何影响呢？ Chris, please.
Yeah, I think I'll share my screen for this one because this is a kind of a visual. This one has visual impact, I believe. These technologies are great, and I am, obviously very pro technology, pro digital. But on the other hand, I don't think we can ignore a lot of the unintended consequences here. And I think this is what this question is getting at, is sort of, what makes you nervous about these things, or what is the sort of the dark side of these things? And I think for sure, security and privacy are very, very important elements here. And I think that's, getting in. Of course, security enables privacy, right? We can't have privacy without security. So one element here is the sheer number of data breaches that are going on every day. If you just do some online searching on this topic, I think you'll actually be quite concerned. And it's actually very scary how frequently and how much data are getting exposed. This is just like a picture of a few months. And like you're talking about, hundreds of millions of people being affected by data breaches. So security is causing a loss of privacy. And then of course, you've got the way that companies are harvesting information is also a little bit concerning, in my opinion. This is it's a funny cartoon, but it shows like, this guy saying, "I'm glad Facebook's taking privacy issues seriously," and then it has Mark Zuckerberg speaking to an advertiser saying, "This person's a nudist, he's married, he makes $75,000 a year, he drinks, he owns a minivan," et cetera. So, in other words, Facebook is giving away all of this sort of private data. So I'd say those are, security and privacy are at the forefront of a lot of people's worries about these technologies. But there are also a lot of other factors here. I think this is a hilarious cartoon, that shows, I don't know if this is a real cartoon or not. It shows in a building that would say, "In case of fire, please leave the building before posting it on social media." Let's change our whole, the way that we think, and the way that we act, that there would be a fire in your building, and before going out, you take a photo, a selfie of yourself, getting, about to be, consumed by the flames. And then you've got, of course, there's, different kinds of social upheaval that can be, and some people think that's a good thing because, coordinating people who are disgruntled or, from the societal point of view. But on the other hand, a lot of people think, hey, calling people to violence may not be the best way, but we have a broad reach now with social media and with digital technologies. We can communicate to almost anybody, so we can coordinate things that some people would find to be, to be not in the society's interest. And and lastly, over here on this little corner piece here is that you think about like platform businesses, and you think Airbnb and things like this, they're great because they can rent out your room. But then the question is, what happens when you have so many people coming in to rent out the rooms that there aren't any apartments left for the people who live there? So, I think it's, there's many pluses, and then there are also many challenges here too, that I think we should all be aware of some of these challenges when we're thinking about these technologies.
Thank you. How might the digitalization continue to impact the future of the work? 数字化如何继续影响未来的工作呢？ Chris, please.
So the future of work, it's a big area, and I think that work is going to change tremendously over the next 50 years. First of all, I think we can agree that progress in artificial intelligence and automation and all these things I talked about earlier, these different jobs that were, let's just say at risk. But there are many other opportunities that are being created for business, and more jobs than those lost or gained are going to be changed as machines complement human labor in the workplace. In other words, we're going to be using computers, artificial intelligence, et cetera, to help do things differently. And so a lot of people would say that yes, there's going to be a lot of jobs lost, and we already talked about that. There's going to be a lot of jobs gained, probably more than lost. That's what's happened in all prior technological revolutions. But then even more than that, there's going to be a lot of jobs changing. And what people have estimated, there's been some studies on this saying that about half of the activities that you carried out by workers could be automated. That doesn't mean your job is going to be automated completely, but some of the activities that you do in your day-to-day are probably going to be automated. So about half of your activities. So workers are going to need different skills over time. And, automation is probably also going to put pressure on wages, in advanced economies. So it's going to be the more automation that we have, it's going to put wage pressure down to keep wages down in general. And so workers are going to need different skills. And that's something I actually studied a lot and talked to people, did some interviews, and thought about some of the skills of the future. And actually, most of them are not technical skills. I mean, some, I said before, we needed to have, certain number of people with digital skills in a business. But really, in the next 50 years, what a lot of the experts I talked to said was, we should be getting people to gain their skills in creativity and resilience, having a growth mindset, having more empathy and more integrity and things like this. So people sometimes call these different kinds of soft skills. Some people would call them personal characteristics. And I think these are very, very important. And of course, there's an element of technical literacy that will probably be beneficial to many people. But something that that many people talk about is the solution architects, to have skills in critical thinking. And you'd be surprised how many different people have written about this and mentioned this. This is something that we're going to have to encourage in the general population, is to think about how, complex systems, how do we change? How does the system change when we change one little thing? And how can we critically assess information? Because in this information overload that we're receiving, how do we know what's actually true and what's not? How do we go about, proving that? So I think these are kind of the skills. And of course, then you have your education breadth, et cetera. But I would say the future of work is going to be much more oriented toward complement with artificial intelligence, with computers, with digital technologies. And we're going to pick on the human parts of it, which is going to be much more oriented toward creativity, resilience, empathy, critical thinking, and so on.
Well, thank you for bringing the wonderful discussion with PBEC Society today. 再次感谢 Chris Tucci 教授今天做客我们的访谈节目，欢迎您收看本期的蕊内人物访谈，我们下期再会。